probably read some George Orwell. You know, we were forced to read it in high school, mostly Animal Farm. At least personally, I didn't really like Animal Farm. It was mostly focused around the Soviet Union and not really around authoritarianism, and it painted this view that communism was bad, when in reality he was trying to focus on authoritarianism being bad. Probably did not what he intended, seeing how George Orwell was a really big democratic socialist. Recently, while traveling in Barcelona, I found this one, George Orwell Homage to Catalonia. This is a journal about his time serving in the militia during the Spanish Civil War. It was basically the setting of how World War II was going to play out. But other than that, I really didn't know much of it. I knew it was communism against fascism. But after reading this, I realized there was way more than just that. It is his perspective of the front lines, but most importantly also about the changes between political parties and how the betrayals in the left side of the war, so I'm talking about the anarchists, the communists, the republic, kind of, played against themselves and made Franco at the end win the war. Let's start with a timeline.
These actual pictures of the Spanish Civil War tell a story of graphic violence. As the fascist horde encircles it, the beautiful and ancient city of Barcelona fills with freedom fighters from around the world.
So June 17, 1936, that's when the Spanish Civil War starts. It's a critical moment in Europe history, the tensions of war are rising. Germany and Italy are fascist already, and Germany has started annexing Austria. Italy just finished annexing Ethiopia. Things are getting hot. Spanish Civil War starts. How does it start? It's really complicated. Because the thing is, before that they were a monarchy, but then they had elections, and then they stopped the elections, and then they had another time of elections. And then this elections, the left-winning party won. And this is where General Franco comes in.
Spain in arms. Under the leadership of General Franco, General Cuerpo de Llano, and others, Spain of tradition is rising to repel the Red Invader. They are greeted by exultant crowds, seeking liberation from the reign of terror. Spain is Queen Isabella, now adopted as the emblem of nationalist Spain.
Now you're in a dictatorship. Late 1936, so around December, October, that's when my boy George Orwell pulls up. And this is where the international involvement begins, with fascist countries supporting Franco and Soviet Union supporting the Republic. None of what we consider now the Allies really chose to support the Republic due to non-intervention policies, which was kind of dumb. Kind of dumb now that we know what Nazi Germany did, but at that point it was probably not dumb. Anyway, in December, George Orwell comes to serve and joins the PUM, Partido Obrero de Unificación Marxista. Militia. PUM, militia. And these were socialists, these were Trotskyists. Not what the Soviet Union is. I never knew the difference until this book, honestly. And it really helps, which we'll get to, but let's continue. He serves in the Aragon front, which is kind of north of Barcelona, and he mostly just sat there. Most of the book was about how boring war is and how you're just sitting there and suffering. Not suffering, just discomfort. His biggest concern was finding cigarettes, which at that point in time, and firewood in winter. Totally fair. The lines were pretty far away from each other. You're shooting miles distance away, so you're not really hitting your targets. You're in the middle of nowhere. He eventually returns back to Barcelona, and this is where the most interesting part of the book, personally, for me was. It's the May 1937 Barcelona fighting, a thing in history that I never knew happened. The communist, PCE, and Stalinist, in this case, they were helped by the Soviet Union, didn't really like the PUM. But not only that, they didn't really like the anarchists, whole other set of people. These were mostly part of labor parties, and the main one that he talks about is the CNT. So the CNT has control of telephone lines, they have control of other key industries. The Republic, the communists, they're like, we don't like that, we don't like your power. And that's where guns start blazing. They bring the police, in this game, Fuerza Armada, and they take over the telephone lines, and this starts what the Barcelona May fighting is. This is when, George Orwell heads to the POOM building and just barricades. And this goes on for a couple weeks, but it sets a power graph that the communists wanted to take back, because they didn't want a revolution. They just wanted a civil war. They wanted to stay in power. They didn't want the socialists and anarchists to be in power. They wanted, the communists to be in power. They wanted them to be. I mean, who doesn't like power? Am I right? This is when tensions between the parties and the left start, and it just gets worse after that. After a series of months, he goes back to a front, comes back because I'm not going to ruin it. Eventually, they outlaw the POOM. The Stalinists and the Republic government make this propaganda campaign, not only inside Spain, but nationwide, since they had this, at the time, different party communications between communists and communists, something that the POOM, which is the socialists, the Trotskyists, and the anarchists, didn't really have. And this sort of set the tensions between saying that the POOM, even though George Orwell was fighting in the lines, were fascists and were actually there to, destroy the Civil War. But in reality, they were not. This was a fabricated event, at least according to George Orwell. He does make a point that it's really hard to find the other side of the story, since they are not the winners. The Stalinist PCU eventually lead a propaganda campaign against the Trotskyists, the PSUC, and the anarchists, the labor unions like the CNT. This led to Orwell becoming an enemy of the state that he was fighting to protect against the fascists. Really confusing stuff. But let's talk about atmosphere for a moment.
Ya se acabó el alboroto y vamos al tiroteo. Y vamos al tiroteo.
He explains the government led by the workers.
It was the first time I'd ever been in a town where the working class were in the saddle.
It was the aspect of the crowds that was the queerest thing. There were no well-dressed people at all. It was a town where the wealthy class practically ceased to exist.
In human history,
This really was a workers' state.
between a military machine and an improvised army of masses.
At the beginning, when he gets there, everyone is for the war. Everything's, war effort. We're going to be doing this together. Pro-militia, everyone liked those guys. And then, as the war progresses, people start forgetting. It's just something that's going on really far away. And do you really, really care about it? No, you just want your cigarettes back. Mess with the Spanish and their cigarettes. That was a big change in atmosphere, other than, just the inner fighting between the leftists. And overall, this book helped me not only just understand George Orwell as a person, but also understand the atmosphere that other of my favorite artists were living in, similar to Camus and Kafka. This sort of alienated, I don't know if alienated would be the word, but bureaucratic, because at the end of the day, there's a scene in the book where he tries to go to the police to try to get one of his friends out of jail, and it just shows this turmoil through the trial by Franz Kafka, this bureaucratic nightmare where you're just being hop off by people to people where no one inside. Pretty crazy times, man. And it's a time I like to romanticize. Not that I want to live through it, but because it shows the heights and depths of what humans can create and accomplish, but also mold, and how vulnerable we really are to each other. Homage to Catalonia served as a window to a world that was rapidly changing. And I mean, it's still rapidly changing, but not only that, it was melting pot of ideologies just together. And, a lot of things happens when different ideologies clash, but not only that, when different people want power, it sort of gets separated between ideas. But in reality, in reality, they all probably had the same enemy at the end of the day. Thank you. And if you like watching, I'm probably going to do a book review next month about Sun and Steel. Currently 10 pages, and big reader over here.